I don't remember much about living with both of my parents. My very first memory is that of my mother sitting in a sun chair on the front porch, listening to the radio, napping behind her wide sunglasses. I was sitting next to her with a pink dino plushie, quietly playing. I would look up at her and she'd be so still, as if paralyzed by the sun. I remember imagining her never moving again, that she would stay in that chair forever, never to play with me. But as soon as I felt that sad little tug in my heart, she'd rustle from her sleep and comfort me. She was right there. Everything was okay. For now. I don't remember their separation or why it happened. I was very young. My mother was moving out, and they decided I was to stay with my dad. There was never a big fight. No screaming. Just 4 large suitcases loaded into a red Toyota. A kiss on the cheek, and a wave goodbye. That was it. Like she was going to the store. I was too young to understand, but I knew I should be sad. I could feel it. She wanted to visit, but she lived on the other side of the country. She would send me postcards and presents, but I didn't get to see her. My father met a new woman, and while I wouldn't call her mom, she turned into it in everything but name. It's just how these stories go sometimes. But things are rarely so simple. I learned that the year I turned 12. My father passed away in an accident. They pulled me out of school to tell me, and it felt like falling into a nightmare. You start to question everything. Every sensation becomes unreal as you look for anything to convince you it's a dream. I couldn't fathom it. After that, things went fast. My stepmother fought to get custody of me, but we didn't have the papers. I wasn't technically adopted. We talked about it, but we never went through with it. As such, the next in line to care for me was my biological mother, on the other side of the country. They contacted her, fully expecting her to relinquish custody. But that's not what happened. She said yes. So I was pulled out of school, had my room packed up, and sent across the country, Wyoming to Florida. By the time I got there, I was still in a daze. It had all gone by so fast, and I had a hard time adjusting. It was one thing being told that everyone loves you and wants to care for you, but it's another feeling entirely when you see your life being put into boxes. You get some perspective, and it's a strange perspective to grasp at that age. The first thing I saw when I arrived at my mother's house near Crystal River was a sun chair. Not the same one she'd had back at our house when I was little, but the same kind. There was also a little table with a battery-powered radio and an ashtray. I didn't remember that she smoked, but then again, I barely remembered her at all. When she came running out of the house, it was hard to see her as Mom. To me, she was just Aileen. Even with the sunglasses and the outstretched arms, she looked nothing like I remembered her. Still, she swept me up, kissed me, and assured me. "It's gonna be okay, baby girl," she sobbed. "It's all gonna be okay." It was an old house, much older than the one we'd lived in. 2 floors. Every room had these wooden panels that looked like they'd topple over from a stiff breeze. It was clean and well kept, but there were certain spots and corners that had a slight tinge of mildew. Lots of pictures on the walls, mostly of herself, but a few of me and Dad as well. No other men, it seemed. A couple of friends, perhaps. "We're gonna have so much fun," she assured me. "I'll show you all around town. You know you can swim with manatees here." "Yeah," I said. "Read it in an article." "Well, ain't that exciting, huh?" She showed me my room, talking about everything and nothing. I could tell she was nervous, but I couldn't fault her for trying to keep a straight face. She could probably tell I wasn't okay. Then again, would I ever be? Those first few days are a blur. I had a room with a nice bed. She helped me put up my posters and connect my laptop to the internet. It was just a shitty wireless connection, but it was better than nothing. We didn't get great reception out there. Something about being too close to the coast. It wasn't really the middle of nowhere. There was a pretty lively neighborhood, but it wasn't the most modern area. Aileen was happy to show me around. She introduced me to everyone, waving happily, and tried to make me feel welcome. She would ask me about everything from favorite subjects in school to favorite music. We would go to the movies, we would hang out at the park, go swimming, all kinds of stuff. But it all just felt hollow in a way, like it wasn't real life. School was different too. I mean, it had to be. It was a new class, with new people. It couldn't be the same. And being new is a coin flip. You're either everyone's favorite or a social pariah. I ended up somehow as both. I remember coming home one day after living with Aileen for about a month. I was tired. I'd been spending some time with some new friends I met in English class, while dodging some catty know-it-alls who kept bugging me during lunch. It was a social minefield, and coming home to my safe space felt like recharging a battery. I put on some music and danced around the room, but after only a couple of seconds, a picture on the wall came down. A framed photo of me and Mom from when I was small. It crashed onto the floor, but the glass didn't break. I jumped, almost dropped my headphones, and settled down. I carefully hung it back up on the nail and stepped away. I must have moved too much. The house was old, and I kept forgetting that. As I turned back to my laptop, the picture fell again. This time I was barely moving at all. I put the picture up and looked closely. I didn't move. As I looked, I saw the nail in the wall being pushed out, and for a third time the picture came crashing onto the floor. This time the glass broke. I didn't know what to make of it. Maybe there was mold or something behind the wallpaper. I couldn't smell anything even when I put my face next to it, but it could be a dozen things. All my other pictures were fine though. It was just this one. Strange. I had Aileen put up a screw instead. That seemed to hold. But that incident made me keep my eyes open, and I started to notice other things around the house. For example, if you went into the basement, you could hear this strange pitter-patter behind the dryer. I figured it was rats, but it seemed a little too clean. Besides, Aileen had never mentioned there being rats, and she talked a lot. But I tried my best not to think of it. An old house makes noise. That's nothing new. I wasn't living in a ghost story. No one is. But then there was the pantry. The kitchen had an old sort of walk-in pantry for storing dry goods. It was more like a closet, if anything. Aileen used it to store things for her baking. She rarely used it, and I rarely left my room. But the few times I went down to the kitchen, I'd grab a handful of almonds or some raisins for a quick snack. And every now and then, I'd hear something. Sometimes it'd sound like a closing door. Other times it'd be a quick tap on the wall. This one time, a bag of flour flew off the shelf as I opened the door. Sometimes I'd just stay and listen. And when I did, I could almost always hear something on the other side. Something moving, crinkling paper bags, a rasping, like something heavy being dragged against hollow wood. I mentioned this to Aileen during one of our dinners. She'd made pasta carbonara. "I think you got rats or something," I said. "Rats?" she chuckled. "There's no rats." "Well, you got something," I said. "In there." I nodded at the pantry. She frowned a little and went over to check, turning over a couple of bags and a sack of potatoes. "I don't see anything," she said. "You sure?" "You gotta listen," I said. "You don't see it, you hear it. I'll have to take your word for it." We finished dinner in silence, but I could tell this bothered her. She kept looking over at the pantry every now and then, as if waiting for it to expose itself. She would keep doing this on and off for the next few days. I'd see her standing in the kitchen, still as a statue, listening. She'd shush me if I got too close. "I heard it," she'd tell me. "I swear I heard it." At least I wasn't the only one. But Aileen was taking it much harder than I was. For me, it was just a bit weird, and I figured she'd call the exterminator. But she was taking it into her own hands. She couldn't have something destroy her picture-perfect future with her estranged daughter after all. So her newfound obsession turned from a strange quirk to downright invasive. After about a week, she was fed up, and had begun breaking wood panels in the pantry to check the wall. She was convinced there was some kind of burrow hidden behind it, but she didn't find anything. Aileen would rip out the entire pantry, leaving items on the kitchen table. I'd have nowhere to sit for dinner, so I started eating in my room. I'd hear her go crazy downstairs with power tools ripping into the wall. It'd make the entire house shake. Now pictures were falling off the walls, and I couldn't tell if it was from the house or from Aileen. Then one day, as I got home from school, she met me in the hall. She had these big safety goggles on, and her eyes were going wide. "I found it," she said. "Come on, I'll show you." "I just gotta put this away." No, she insisted. "It'll just take a second." She took me by the arm. I pulled away, giving her a cold look. "I want to put this away," I repeated. She looked me up and down. Then she took a deep breath and nodded. "All right, just hurry." She'd torn out the back wall of the pantry and taken down the shelves. Turns out the back wall was just a thin wooden layer, some insulation, and then a hollow space. It was about 2 feet wide and went through most of the walls. "I think they skimped on insulation when they built this place," she said. "Something's hiding up there." "I told you, rats." "It's not rats," she snapped at me, slamming her fist into the wall. My heart skipped a beat as I stepped back. She was breathing heavily. She wasn't blinking. "I'm not telling you again," she continued. "There are no rats. There have never been rats. This is a good house." "Okay, fine," I mumbled. "It's not rats." She didn't say anything. She just adjusted her safety goggles, picked up her cordless saw, and got back to it. I ended up staying in my room more often than not. Aileen kept working on the downstairs bathroom, tearing up the tiled floor to check underneath. Of course, she didn't find anything. Every day she'd suggest something new. Maybe there were raccoons, opossums, maybe snakes. Looking deep enough under the floor, she even found that they'd been insulated with old newspapers and sacks of dry grass and blue sunflowers. Something regional, I guess. Aileen was furious. "For all the years I've lived here, I've never had these problems," she said. "I don't know why it's starting now. It doesn't make sense." "It's not a big deal," I assured her. "It's probably nothing." "But it's not nothing though, is it? It's something. We both heard it." "Yeah, but who cares? You're tearing up the house." "Better me than them." We barely talked for a whole week. She would still help me around the house when she could, but as soon as the bare necessities were out of the way, she'd go back to tearing up the floor. She tried using traps and poison, but wouldn't catch anything. One day, I found her sitting on a pile of debris in the hallway. She was exhausted. She had dark circles under her eyes. I felt a bit sorry for her, so I sat down on the staircase to keep her company. "You should give it a rest," I said. "Not like give up, just take a break." "I'm good," she panted. "Just give me a sec." "Don't you ever use that sun chair anymore?" I asked. "You used to love those." "The what?" "The sun chair," I said. "The one out front." She looked at me for a while, not understanding what I was saying. Then something clicked. "Right, that," she said. "I don't really use that." "Why not?" "What kind of life is that, just lounging around waiting for something to happen?" And with that, she got up on her feet. She turned to me, power tool in hand. She was making a point. "Sometimes you gotta do something." The next time the picture of her and me fell from my wall, I didn't bother putting it back up. There was no point. It would keep falling over and over again anyway. I just had to accept that my life was full of whirring, chopping, and clanking. I still barely knew the woman I lived with, and I was supposed to accept whatever nonsense she came up with. But one day when I came home, she wasn't chopping up the floor anymore. Instead, she was sitting on the stairs leading up to the front door, holding a bucket. And for the first time in weeks, Aileen looked satisfied. When I came up to her, she tapped the side of the bucket. "Check it," she said. "Told you it wasn't rats." Cane toads, about 24 of them in total. One of them hopped out of the pantry, she continued. I had to check around the basement, but they'd made a sort of nest around an old pipe. So that's it? I asked. You got 'em all? Sure did, she laughed. And I plugged up their nest, so we're done. We're done? She swept me up in a hug and kissed me on the side of the head. I felt so relieved. Maybe she could be normal again. Aileen talked about bringing in a carpenter to fix the problems she'd found while breaking open the walls. Meanwhile, she settled on hastily assembling a couple of plywood pieces. We would have to use the upstairs shower for a while to avoid water damage. She eventually returned to her usual cheery self. I'd see her dancing around the kitchen to hits from the 90s. We made our own scones one weekend. And not long after that, she returned to work. She'd taken some time off to get me set up, but now she was getting more confident. She worked as a county recorder, so she usually sat at a desk all day, or in long-winded meetings. It was nice not having to worry about her anymore. I could focus on just keeping my newfound social life alive. In that age, that's easier said than done. One day, I came home talking on the phone with a friend from school. We were discussing a group English assignment, and how we were supposed to motivate a slacker to contribute. It was nice to talk to someone who despised group projects as much as I did. I threw my backpack on my bed, turned around, and stopped. The picture on the wall was back up. Now I knew for a fact I hadn't put it back up there. I also knew cane toads weren't to blame, so it had to be Aileen. But a part of me kept thinking, what if it wasn't? I agonized over this for a while. If it wasn't Aileen, it must have been someone else. But did I want to bring that to her attention? I'd seen the way she got upset over a couple of cane toads. Who knew what she'd do if she suspected an actual intruder? I decided it was better to keep quiet and to keep an ear to the ground. Despite Aileen's best efforts, things weren't as simple as a couple of toads poking around in the basement. Things were still moving in the pantry. I'd still hear something push against the wood panels, and at times I'd see pictures move on their own, but I kept my mouth shut. Aileen was like a different person. She was cheerful, motivated, and curious. We'd talk about my day, take turns buying groceries, and make all kinds of plans together. I was allowed to come and go freely, as long as she could keep tabs on me. Typical mom stuff. But I'd still see the little things around the house. Once I even moved a picture myself, and when I came back, it was fixed, straightened, and Aileen had been gone all day. I would test this a little further each day. I'd place things around the house and take pictures with my phone. Later, I'd compare them to see if anything changed. Sometimes they did. For example, pictures were straightened. A couple of cans in the pantry were rearranged to have the labels pointing outward. A few candle holders on a dresser downstairs were fixed to be the same height. Little pointless things. I think the most noticeable thing was my stuffed animals. I only had a few from my old house, and I kept them on a chair in the corner. They were rearranged to always face outward. I didn't do that. But it wasn't clear how this was happening, or why, and I didn't want to bring it up with Aileen. Maybe she was doing it to mess with me as a test. I decided to unpack my final box. I had been putting it off since it was mostly nostalgic stuff, but I figured it was time to bite the bullet. Pictures of Dad and my stepmom, little trinkets and doodads, and of course my old pink dinosaur plushie. I'd had it since I was a baby. Dad used to say it was the first thing anyone gave me. As I walked around the room putting it all up, Aileen walked in. She helped me rearrange some things, made some small talk, and finally picked up the dino plushie. "Well, isn't this a handsome fellow?" she said. "What's his name?" It was such a strange question. It didn't have a name, she should have known that. Then again, it had been a while, but I decided to mess with her. "Don't you remember?" I said. "It's Kenny." "Right, Kenny," she nodded. "Glad to see he's still around." She was probably just trying to make me feel at home still, but it was weird. She was lying. It made me question what else she might be lying about. It didn't take Aileen that long to notice I was up to something. She noticed me taking pictures and rearranging things. It was her house after all. She, if anyone, would notice if something was different. So one day, as we sat down for dinner, she put her hand on my phone. "I need you to tell me what you're doing," she said. "Don't think I haven't noticed." "I don't know," I lied. "I'm just getting used to the place." "There's more to it," she insisted. "I've seen what you do with the paintings and the photos. I'm just fixing them." "No, you're not." She looked me dead in the eye, and I could see that spark. Just like Gwen was tearing out the pantry. That flame. There was no point in lying to her. "I'm not moving them, but something is." I told her what I'd noticed. I showed her the before and after pictures, and as soon as she realized this wasn't a cane toad problem anymore, she got up from the table, locked the doors, and fetched her toolbox. "We're not leaving this house until we deal with this." "Can't we just call someone?" I asked. "What's the big deal?" "No, we can't," Aileen said. "We're dealing with this. I'm dealing with this." "Well, I'm going to go ahead and call someone." She snatched the phone from my hands, stepped into the pantry, and dropped it into the space between the walls. Before I could protest, she had her hand up in a shush. "This is serious," she said, "and we need to deal with this." This time, she wasn't taking any half measures. She was tearing out walls, calling out to whatever intruder she'd imagined. She'd wake up at random times in the night, silently walking around the house, watching. She'd keep my bedroom door locked to make sure there were no distractions. Then she got a gun. Maybe she'd always had one, but now she walked around with it. Her reasoning was, there was an intruder, and she needed to defend us. She would deal with this, one way or the other. And until she did, I wasn't allowed to leave. "They could take you when you leave, whenever you're out of sight," she'd say. "I can't take that risk." So for days on end, there'd be no internet, no phone, nothing but power tools and random shouts. Threats, smacks, screams, all directed at this invisible foe. And yet, at night, little things would change, but never in a way that Aileen would notice. Then one morning I woke up to this strange sound, a little vibration. I looked to the side only to find my cell phone laying on the nightstand. It was a bit dirty, and it had a crack in the corner, but it was functional. I thought that maybe Aileen was done, and that this was a peace offering. I walked into the hallway, only to see her using a screwdriver to remove an outlet from the wall. I quickly hid the phone behind my back, but I was a bit too quick on the draw. It slipped out of my hand and sailed across the floor into my room. Aileen looked up. What was that? I couldn't make up an excuse fast enough. She got up and pushed past me, almost launching me down the stairs. She picked up the phone from the floor and looked at me with disbelief. "Are you messing with me?" she asked. "Is this a joke to you?" "No," I said. "It was just there." "I am your mother," she bellowed. "You don't lie to me like this." "You mean like you lied about Kenny?" She shook her head and frowned. "Kenny?" she asked. "The dinosaur," I snapped back. "He doesn't have a name, but you keep pretending. Do you remember anything about me?" And I confronted her. I asked about where I was born. I asked about my middle name. I asked about my dad, our first vacation, our first car. A couple of things she could answer, a couple of them she couldn't. Maybe she was too surprised to think clearly. "You used to lay in your sun chair on the front porch," I said. "What did you used to drink when you did?" "This is ridiculous. You drank your favorite drink every time you went out. What was it?" "Campari and orange juice," she sighed. "That's my favorite drink. I get that all the time." "Wrong. You never drank while watching me. You never once did." We just looked at one another. A couple of uneasy thoughts crossed my mind. Maybe she wasn't my mom. I headed for the stairs. She was right behind me, wielding the screwdriver like a knife. She asked me to stop, but I kept going. I headed straight for the front door, but she'd locked and bolted it. I got it open, but not fast enough. She caught up to me and slammed the door shut, leaning over me. Her faces were inches away from mine. "You'll have to wait in the basement while I fix this," she panted. "Don't make a fuss." "You're not my mom, are you?" She didn't respond. She just grabbed my arm and led me downstairs. I didn't even know the basement door had a lock, but turns out it did. It was just me, a washer, a dryer, and old boxes. Nothing important. Mostly just holiday stuff. Christmas, Thanksgiving, 4th of July. I stayed down there all day, hearing Aileen tear the place apart. She couldn't let go. No matter what, she was going to have her perfect house and her perfect daughter. Nothing was supposed to go wrong, but somehow it had. Maybe she thought I would forget about the whole thing if she just finished up quickly. Hell, maybe she was planning on getting me something really, really nice. But I couldn't let go of that one thought. That maybe Aileen wasn't my actual mom. Maybe she was just some woman living here. But she had the pictures. There was mail addressed to her from years back in the basement boxes. I couldn't make sense of it. So I waited for hours. Aileen's frustration grew louder and violent. I could hear her throw things, knock over furniture, and yell at the walls. "What do you want?" she'd scream. "Who are you?" She was still using her power tools, cutting into the walls, into the furniture. I could hear something falling apart, something thumping down the stairs. And with every crash, Aileen would get angrier, until finally she would break down crying hysterically in the hallway above. I tried not to listen. I had no idea what she was capable of anymore. So instead, I brought out one of the old boxes and browsed. Old bills, newspaper cancellations, birthday cards, all kinds of everyday things. I didn't even bother to read most of them. They were all addressed to Aileen, and there was nothing more to it. Little bits and bobs of a life well lived. I stopped at a couple of birthday cards. There were a couple from me. I sent her one on her 40th birthday, and it was there. There were invitations to weddings, Christmas cards, well wishes, even a couple of get well cards from when she had her appendix taken out. But underneath, I find something strange. A custom print. "Good luck on the move," one card said. "We'll miss you." I turned it over, 3 friends looking into the camera, 2 looking sarcastically sad, and a 3rd woman rolling her eyes, addressed a couple of years ago. But the woman in the middle, the one it was clearly addressed to, wasn't Aileen. It was a stranger holding a fruity drink and who had the same eyes as me. The Aileen I knew was off to the side, a friend. The card was signed Bella and Laura. The woman on the right was Laura, not Aileen. I dropped the card on the floor and looked up. I was in a stranger's house, someone who'd known my real mother and taken her place, and that person was freaking out upstairs armed with power tools. I had no idea how much danger I was in, but I could feel it. My body tensed up. Every breath felt colder, sharper. My legs grew restless, getting ready to run. I had to do something. I put the box back on the shelf. She didn't need to know that I knew. I looked for a tool, something to pop the door open with. But there was nothing. She'd made sure of that. I thought maybe I could break open something from the washer and use it as a lockpick or something. Anything. But the door popped open. Aileen didn't do that. No one did. It was just open. I walked up the stairs, carefully looking out. Aileen was moving around upstairs. It couldn't have been her. I opened the door, took a few steps outside, and headed for the front door. Then, the floor creaked. I stopped and held my breath. Then footsteps. Aileen came running down the stairs. I threw myself on the front door, and this time, I got it open in time. I was out, running across the front lawn. Wet grass tangled between my toes. I headed for the closest neighbor, screaming at the top of my lungs. I saw a door open across the street. Then I heard a gunshot. I dropped to the ground, covering my head. The neighbors screamed and hurried back inside. Aileen, or Laura, had pulled out her handgun. She'd fired a warning shot. She grabbed me by the arm and pulled me back inside, still holding the gun. Perfectly cut grass stuck to my face as I was dragged past the forgotten sun chair. "I live here now!" she yelled through gritted teeth. "She moved! I live here now! You don't get to pick your mom!" She pulled me back inside and locked the door. She took me upstairs into my bedroom and locked that door too. We sat down across from each other on the floor, with her gun casually pointed my way. We stayed there for a couple of minutes just looking at each other. Two strangers sharing a house. She looked different in the dark. I could see it now. "I wanted to make things perfect," she sighed. "It was supposed to be different this time. Aileen was supposed to be different." "What did you do to her?" She shook her head. "She moved. I just didn't file the papers." Of course. She worked at the county records. Aileen's official address was still registered here, so when they looked her up, they reached Laura, still living there, and she just went for it. "If I could get you, I could get anyone," she continued. "Then I'd really be her, and not, well, me." She picked up the pink dinosaur plushie and casually tossed it aside. She was done pretending, and with that, she raised the handgun. "I have to try again," she murmured. "I'm sorry. Don't do this." "What choice do I have?" she asked. "Would you like to be me?" I didn't answer. She shook her head again. "Didn't think so." My tongue felt dry. A sting of salt burned my eye from a cold sweat. I didn't know whether to throw myself at her or shield my face. Instead, I did nothing. My forehead felt cold, as if anticipating a bullet. She tensed her trigger finger, but nothing happened. See, there's this thing about old houses. The shadows seem a little longer. There are noises coming out of every corner. 9 times out of 10, it's just the wind. A poorly constructed wall. Or hell, maybe a cane toad. But this shadow had been different. Shadows don't fix pictures on the walls. They don't raid your pantry. And they don't put back the one picture you have of your real mom on the wall, as if trying to show you when you're being lied to. And they certainly don't put a long, dark, bone-like finger in the way of a trigger. But this one did. It emerged from the wallpaper, a solid shade of chromatic dark, leaning over Laura like a misshapen shadow. Taller, longer, slimmer, at least 7 feet tall, but hunched over into a ball. It had put a long, dark finger in the way of the trigger, stopping Laura from pulling it. Her breathing quickened. She tried to push, but nothing happened. She struggled and strained, trying with 2 hands, but nothing. Instead, a second hand grasped the back of her head and smashed her straight forward into the floor. I'd never seen anything so violent. One forceful smack, and she'd lost all her front teeth, broken her nose, and cracked part of her forehead. It left a blood-tufted dent on the wooden floor. The thing stopped for a moment, giving Laura a chance to gasp for air. As she did, it turned to the pink dinosaur plushie and put it back on the drawer facing outward. Even now, it couldn't stop itself from making things right. Maybe that was the point all along, to set things right. Labels out, pictures straight, no lies. In one swift motion, it stood up, dragging Laura along like a hapless ventriloquist puppet. It slammed the bedroom door open with its shoulder, knocking it off its hinges, clattering to the floor. Laura kicked and screamed, kicking and slapping candle holders, chairs, and photos as she went. I looked down the hallway, only to see them disappear into the bathroom. Laura couldn't form a sentence anymore, but kept making this pleading moan. Even from a distance, you could hear her spitting up teeth. But the bathroom door closed. There were screams, a mirror being broken, thumping over and over as a body was beaten into a pulp, bone against ceramic tiles, flesh crushed into paste. I didn't even notice the sirens outside. The neighbors had called the police. I didn't notice them breaking down the front door or coming up the stairs. But when they did, they bore witness to the same thing I did. Laura and something else locked in the bathroom. There was a final shriek cut short as Laura was thrown out of the second-story bathroom window. I was wrapped in a blanket and taken out on the lawn. An officer held a hand up, asking me not to look. My shaking hands looked weird in the blue and red light. The neighbors were peeking out their front door again. And no one could explain what had happened in that bathroom. And in the days that followed, no one could explain why all the chairs, photos, and candle holders had been put back in their rightful place overnight. After that, things went by fast. Laura had willingly committed a clerical error to service her elaborate identity theft, and things were corrected. My biological mother flew down from Nashville, where she'd moved about 1.5 years prior. A couple of her boxes had gotten lost in the move, and she'd been fighting to get her paperwork in order. Apparently, it was as if someone had been actively fighting her efforts. Imagine that. Moving in with her is another story in itself, a rather mundane one. But she still lounged in her sun chair, listening to the radio. She had her favorite drink on the weekends. And she knew that my pink dinosaur plushie didn't need a name to be my favorite thing. It wasn't much, but it was real. Today, I'm 27 years old. A couple of years ago, I moved back to that little community outside Crystal River. I bought that same house for myself and painstakingly fixed it up over 2 drawn-out summers. It was cheap, but a lot of work. Some people would question why I'd ever want to go back there, but I can't see myself living anywhere else. Yes, it was traumatic, but that wasn't the house's fault. That was Laura. No, this is a house of little creaks and nudges, of long shadows and straight pictures, of cane toads in the yard, and pictures I don't bother to straighten. And I'd rather live in a crooked home than a perfect hell.